Over the past 3 years, we have been doing transparency efforts in telling the world what's really happening in the West Philippine Sea. What do you think has changed?
In early 2024, SeaLight put out a report called Assertive Transparency. In order to defeat or deter a gray zone actor, you needed to set 3 conditions. That was to impose costs on the aggressor, to rally national resilience, and rally international support. What would China have done had the Philippines not stood up?
No spin, no lies, just the truth. Magandang gabi sa ating lahat at welcome sa Just the Truth podcast. Ako si Tristan Tarriela, and tonight is another opportunity to discuss relevant and timely issues ng ating bansa kasama ang ating guests. Platforms like this is important to expose Filipinos to the truth, particularly teaching how to discern between facts and fake news. That is the goal of this podcast. And just like the name of this podcast, the truth will be our lens in viewing the world, lalo na sa usaping politika. Sadly, nowadays, ang katotohanan ay binubura at namamanipula. Kaya mahalaga na maging matalino at mapanuri tayo. At ang isyong katulad nito ang pag-uusapan natin dito lang sa Just the Truth. But before we start our conversation with our guests, let's address something. May mga kababayan tayong ginagamit ang salitang gera bilang pang-gaslight sa effort ng ating pamahalaan. Statements tulad ng panay ang tanggol natin sa West Philippine Sea, pero kaya ba nating makipagdigmaan sa China? Kailanman hindi ito sagot sa sigalot sa WPS. Dahil hindi physical war ang nagaganap ngayon, kundi information war. Have you noticed how trolls twist the narrative? How some people criticize the government about our efforts sa West Philippine Sea. Even the Chinese social media pages ay nagpapakalat ng maling impormasyon at mockery sa ipinaglalaban nating lahat. This is the type of war na dapat nating ipanalo ngayon. Tulad ng pagkapanalo ng Pilipinas sa Arbitral Award noong 2016. Ang batas at katotohanan ang laging sandigan ng Pilipinas pagdating sa pinakamalaking geopolitical issue ng bansa ngayon. If that is the case, why are there still quote-unquote Filipinos siding with China's claims? Kung sino man ang sinusuportahan mo, iisa lang dapat tayo sa laban natin sa West Philippine Sea. Kaya mag-ingat sa kinukonsumong impormasyon online. Maging mapanuri, mag-fact-check, outsmart the trolls, and join the fight against misinformation. At kung usapin lang ng war of information and exposing the gray zone activities ng China, ang guest natin ay eksperto pagdating dito. Siya ang founder at director ng SeaLight, isang maritime transparency project that operates out of Stanford University's Gordon Natt Center for National Security Innovation. Katuwang ang mga journalists, ang proyektong ito provides real-time media of China's aggression to expose them in the international spotlight. Dagdag pa rito, ang guest natin tonight ay isang retired United States Air Force Colonel na aktibong sumusuporta sa laban natin sa West Philippine Sea. And he is none other than retired Colonel and current Director of SeaLight, Raymond Powell. Welcome to our program, Ray. Ray, thank you for allowing me to interview you on my podcast, and thank you for flying all the way from US just to be here, right?
Just for you, Jay. In fact, I'm waiting for the reimbursement for my plane ticket.
My reimbursement or your reimbursement? Because according to the pro-China trolls, you're actually my boss.
Yeah.
You flew from US to here just to pay my salary.
Yeah, but the CIA, they pay so little these days, so I need to just get a little extra on the side.
Okay. I mean, we're just kidding, okay? Just
What?
for the record. There's no fact with everything that we said a while ago.
So that's not just the truth?
Yes, it's just the truth.
Okay.
So we're not allowed
All
to...
right. No joking about the CIA?
No joking, no lies, and no spins.
Okay.
Okay. You served the U.S. military for 35 years.
Did.
And you also posted in Vietnam and Australia as defense attaché. And all of a sudden, I think 3 years or 4 years ago, your name started popping up and becoming more very relevant in social media in monitoring the Chinese aggression, not just here in the West Philippine Sea,
Yep.
but even in Senkaku area,
Yeah.
in Yellow Sea,
Yeah.
in the entire South China Sea. So, what made you decide that instead of enjoying your retirement, you're now back again in this security landscape?
Yeah. One of the things that 35 years in the military did for me was to give me a lot of assignments in which the entire South China Sea, not just the West Philippine Sea, but the whole thing, was an issue that kept coming back and coming back. I joined the military in 1986, mostly because I was failing out of college, mostly because I really wasn't.
During that time, I was only 3 years old.
Yeah. Mostly because I actually wasn't really going to college. I was finding other things to do. But anyway, my very, very first assignment was Clark Air Base, Republic of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And my assignments kept bringing me back around to this question that kept coming back to me. And this included all of those assignments you talked about of being a military attaché, is why is China being so successful in this thing that we call the maritime gray zone, right? Why has their expansionism into the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands and all these different places, and yet we don't seem to really have a coherent strategy for how we're going to counteract this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wanted to dig back into that, and that was what brought me back into this space around the South China Sea. And of course, that brought me here to the Philippines, where I also have a little bit of a family connection.
Yes. Just a fun fact, your wife is from Davao City.
She is
right?
indeed. In fact, she's there right now, waiting for me to get done talking to you so I can go down and see her.
And right now, every once in a while, you also fly to Davao to meet your in-laws.
Sure.
And how do you interact with them?
Great. I mean, we have a great relationship, always have. My wife's family is very, very engaging and interesting and funny, and they have a great time whenever they're together.
Engaging in a way that you also talk about South China Sea or West Philippine Sea, or talk about Chinese aggression at some point?
Not that much. We actually just talk about normal family stuff. So,
Okay. You started with a SeaLight, and it started with Project Mushu at Stanford.
Yep.
Can you walk with us
Sure.
how that project started and what it is right now?
Right. So I retired in late 2021, and then in 2022 I did this fellowship at Stanford. It was a really completely unrelated fellowship. It was called the Distinguished Careers Institute, and was mostly about purpose and community and wellness and intergenerational learning and all kinds of things. Had nothing to do at all with security or Southeast Asia. But while I was at Stanford, I got involved with this center called the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. And so sometimes people will hear about that and they'll wonder, what that is. And it really is a way of trying to bring Silicon Valley entrepreneurship and innovation to national security problems. And so I was sort of looking at what they were doing in the classroom and things like that, and I was really interested. But I wasn't a normal student. I was a fellow with this program, and so I didn't really fit into their ecosystem at all. But I know the director. He used to be, actually, his name is Joe Felter. He used to be in the first Trump administration. He worked in the Pentagon, and I knew him from his time as an undersecretary there. And so I went to them and I said, look, I'm interested in this innovation space and what it could bring to this South China Sea problem that I've been staring at for 3.5 decades. And just curious, what could I do in this space that might be able to apply your methods to looking at that problem? And they said, well, tell us what you want to do and go do it, right? And so we just started, and when I say we, I mean there was a bunch of volunteers all got together and started having interviews. And one of the things about the Gordian Knot Center and its methodology is it's talk to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so we had over 100 conversations. I came to the Philippines for the first time in 2022 just to have conversations with different people. I met with Justice Carpio. I met with a number of other people who were already involved in this space and just trying to understand the problem. And then in early 2023, we started coming up with this idea that maybe the reason China has been so successful is because so few people actually know what they're doing, right? And it was like, maybe the gray zone is a place that they are having success because it's gray. And so I know that the gray zone is not popular, to use that term is not popular in the Philippines anymore. They like this new term, ICAD. But it still has value to me because it's just the idea of what if we turn on the lights and people can actually see what's happening in this gray zone. And so we started sharing our data, and the rest, I don't want to get too far in front of you because honestly, in early 2023, I started coming out here and giving presentations, and that was the first time you and I met.
Yeah, March
Yep.
of 2023, a
Yep.
month after we started the Transparency Initiative. And you did your presentation, you talk about, the best way to counter gray zone is to put sunlight. It's like a disinfectant.
Yep.
If you're going to turn off the light, there will be cockroaches crawling, right?
Yeah.
That was your presentation. And when we met at Strat-based event, March of 2023, this was the first time that I announced a Transparency Initiative.
Yes.
That we wanted to, in your lens, you wanted to expose the gray zone because accordingly you said there's no gray area here. But when we announced the Transparency Initiative in that Strat-based event of Dindo Manhit, I highlighted that the reason why we're doing that is because of awareness of the Filipino people. That's the first one. And second is for the international community also to know that it's China who's violating the international law. And again, I would like to highlight that this is not a pre-planned meeting and announcement of what we did way back in 2023.
Yeah.
These are like purely coincidental.
Yeah.
And I that was the first time you met me, and I also heard about your presentation.
Yeah, actually, I remember after I gave my presentation, because one of the things that I put into my presentation was a recommendation that the Philippines consider embedding reporters.
Yes.
And you came up to me after that and you said, we're actually doing that next week. And so I said, oh, well, it's good that my recommendations have such immediate impact.
It's because during the first few days of the transparency efforts, when our Coast Guard personnel are the ones, using their camera, taking videos and photos of the incidents, the Chinese government always has a very, easy excuse saying that it's a Coast Guard who's doing this propaganda, video production of their own narrative, blah, blah, blah. So I realized that for us to be able to counter that, we need to have media on board. And the Philippines is not like China. We are a democratic country. There's freedom of speech.
Yeah.
There's freedom of the press. So if you're going to embed media personalities, they'll be the one to independently write their own editorial story, capture the videos and incidents. It will be a powerful narrative.
Well, so this is interesting because here's a little bit of backstory I've never told you. Is in 2005-06, I was at the Army's Command and General Staff College in Kansas as an Air Force guy. I was, and at the end of the term, I wrote a paper for basically an essay contest almost, right? That basically was trying to give some recommendations, and it was called "Unleash the Chaos," which makes me sound like an agent of chaos, right? But what I was saying was, look, in the Iraq War, we did something new as a country, which was we embedded reporters, and we did not try to control them. We tried to allow them to just do reporting, and we did that with a certain amount of confidence, believing that actually our soldiers act with honor, act with integrity and professionalism, and what these reporters report is overall, on the main, going to be good for the country. And I looked at what the Philippines was facing and said to myself, I'm like, they are standing on principle. They have competent professional mariners, right? If they unleash the chaos, if you will. And again, it makes it sound like it is, I want things to be chaotic, but to a certain extent, you're leaning into your strengths as a democracy, as a free society, to just let reporters report. Report what they see, and don't try to control what they put out. And by it, maybe some bad things will come out along the way because that's the nature of a free society. But by and large, the story is a good story because you have people standing up with courage and conviction and professionalism against a larger adversary, and that's a good story.
And that is not a state-sponsored editorial narrative of
Right.
what really happened.
Right. This is not the Global Times from China.
Or China Daily.
Or China Daily or Xinhua or whatever it is. Yes.
Or the Chinese embassy here in Manila.
Your fan club? No, none of those. So
But, after we embedded the local media here in the Philippines, the Chinese government, they're very innovative in coming up with different excuses. And they said, like, here's the Philippines now co-opting their own media personalities in the Philippines, dictating what will be their story. And they are once again, amplifying their own propaganda story. So we made some adjustment after that. We realized that it's not enough that we embed Filipino journalists.
yeah.
It's important for us to embed journalists coming from like-minded states,
Yeah.
whether they are Japanese, Australian, European, or even American. I mean, if you embed them and then you allow them to take their videos and photos, write their own story, be an eyewitness of the Chinese violation of the international law, then the Chinese government will not have any more excuse
Yeah.
to turn the narrative.
Not that they won't make one.
Not
Right.
that they won't make
So,
one,
but yes, no. What you do is you expose that their accusations of propaganda are actually it's themselves propaganda, right? Because most people understand that there is a difference between media in a free society and a media in an authoritarian society, right? That's why the Global Times and Xinhua and China Daily, those media organizations must report within the guidelines, the very, very strict guidelines their government sets down. Whereas in a free society, that is the very definition of a free society, is that you're going to allow, in this case, the press, to do what it sees as correct, right? Now, certainly if you're a Filipino and you're watching this huge Chinese ship shoot a water cannon at a small wooden boat, you may also have patriotic feelings. But if you value your role as a journalist, you're going to try to be as objective as you possibly can.
In a lot of interviews way back in 2023 until now, you have always been given a lot of appreciation of the Philippines' effort of transparency, right? Not because we know each other, but you really recognize the importance of transparency in countering Chinese gray zone. So my question is, over the past 3 years that we have been doing transparency efforts in telling the world what's really happening in the West Philippine Sea, what do you think has changed and whether we were able to advance our national interest because of, being transparent and telling this to the world?
Sure. Well, as you'll recall, in early 2024, we put out a report, we from SeaLight put out a report called assertive transparency, which was our word for it. Obviously the Philippine government has its own words for it. That was what we thought was an appropriate word for it. And what we said was, in order to defeat or deter a gray zone actor, you needed to set 3 conditions. And so we said that was to impose costs on the aggressor, to rally national resilience, and rally international support. And the reason we thought it was important to make sure that it was clear that it was all 3 of those things was because people, if they measured success only on whether China was deterred in the near term, would come up with some, obviously, clearly they don't seem very deterred, right? They're obviously increasing their aggression. But the question is, there's no way to prove the counterfactual. Like, what would China have done had the Philippines not stood up? What would China have done had the Philippines not shown the world what was going on? Well, we don't know the answer to that, but I'm pretty confident in saying that Philippine national resilience would not have rallied. Because what do we know about people, human beings? I mean, when we see something, when we see the pictures, when we see the video, we see the aggressions, we see Filipinos standing up for their rights, and we see them standing up against the water cannons, again, with courage and determination and professionalism and restraint, then we have a reaction to that, and the Filipino people have a reaction to that. So that national resilience is built on the strength of what people see. And then when the Philippine government says, we're going to have to spend more defending ourselves, if I'm a Filipino, I say, okay, I get it. I mean, I've seen the video. I understand the threat. And I know I really want the government to spend money on things close to home. I want them to spend it on my roads and my social welfare and other things. But I understand the argument for national security because it's right there on my TV screen in my YouTube feed. And then international support, I think that's just undeniable. I mean, the amount of the number of different governments who have come in. And honestly, and this is not just moral support. It's not just the number of governments that just came out and supported the arbitral award, for example. It's material support, governments committing actual money, ships, radars, capabilities to the Philippines so the Philippines can defend itself. That happens because they saw the pictures too. So, that's where the transparency really makes a difference, because in the end, what the Philippines needs over the long term is to build its own capacity, and it needs the people of the Philippines to be behind it, and it needs the international community to be behind it, and that's what happens when you show them.
I definitely agree with you on the three things that you said, right? For example, the domestic, 94% of the Filipinos now support transparency effort. And as you said, members of the Congress, the Senate, they don't ask questions anymore about why are we even going to modernize the armed forces of the Philippines? Why are we going to acquire more Coast Guard assets?
In fact, what I see is people ask, why can't we go faster?
Yeah. Why can't we go faster? Why can't we buy more bigger, larger Coast Guard vessels? And for the international support, as you attended the WPS summit, I asked Secretary Gilbert Chodoro, before he came into office, there were only 2 visiting forces agreement that the Philippines signed between the U.S. and Australia. And after 2 years that he has been in office already, there are more than half a dozen of all those deepening of security arrangement with a lot of countries, from Japan, New Zealand, and other European Union members.
One of my favorite examples is Canada. Right. So
and Canada, of course.
So, think about Canada. Canada is a member of NATO, right? It is not generally considered an Indo-Pacific powerhouse country. It has a lot of concerns close to home. And yet, of all of the countries in the world where it could say, we should contribute to this thing called dark vessel detection and give our capability to the Philippine Coast Guard, it chose the Philippines. Why? Because it saw the pictures, right? Do you think that would have happened if it had not been right? I mean, those legislators who go in to make the decision and those government officials, when they're trying to figure out who to prioritize on top, the Philippines gets pushed to the top because they see with their own eyes.
So going back to what you said a while ago, the first one is imposing costs. Second is national resiliency. Third is international support. For the second and third, that is understandable.
Yep.
But right now, there are still some critics of transparency efforts saying that it is not enough that we expose Chinese aggression, because the water cannoning, the harassment of the Filipino fishermen, the bullying of smaller Coast Guard vessels, and the presence of the Chinese maritime militia in different parts of the maritime in the West Philippine Sea remains to be there and still happening day by day. Now there are additional Chinese research vessels passing through or encroaching our exclusive economic zone. So some critics are asking, are we really a believer of the transparency that it would alter or make China fall in line because of the reputational damage, or it is escalatory in a way that it even provoked them to come up with a much more, higher level of aggression?
So again, this is a counterfactual. So the problem with counterfactuals is you never know the answer to what the other possibility is. The question is, what is the alternative? And the alternative that China offers the Philippines is to acquiesce, to give us some things that we want. We see this all the time. For example, if you want to be able to explore for gas at Recto Bank, then let us come into this agreement where our sovereignty is imposed upon you. If you want to have your fishermen return to Scarborough Shoal, well, let's have a discussion. To which I say, what's to discuss? You're the ones keeping the fishermen out of Scarborough Shoal. They could be back there tomorrow. All you have to do is stop keeping them out. So why don't you? Well, because they want something in return, right? So the question, and this is the question with any extortion racket, right? I'm going to take something from you. I'm going to hold you at threat, or and then I'm going to say, what will you give me so I don't punch you in the mouth, right? That's essentially what they're offering. And the question, the answer is, well, what can I give you that's enough so that you stop threatening me? And the answer is nothing, right? Anything you give up, there will only be another demand after that, right? Because I'm standing there and I've still got my fist out. I'm still ready to punch you in the mouth. And so you give me a $10 today, and tomorrow I'm back and I'm like, today the price went up. It's 15 now.
Yeah. But there are also some people who are not, again, another group of people who are not supportive of transparency, saying that every time we publicize water cannoning, ramming, Filipino people are already experiencing information fatigue. Some of them are already experiencing being desensitized to the issue. Do you believe that every time we do that, the Filipino people becoming more uninterested of all the harassment that we tell the Filipino people?
Well, it is one of the problems with the increasing aggression, right? So let's say the problem 2 years ago was people saw some swarming and they saw, wow, that's bad, right? Now they see swarming and they're like, yeah, that's what they do, right? A year ago they saw water cannoning, that's bad. Now if they see water cannoning, right? So that's always a danger, which is why I think it's important to keep telling the story in different ways, so that this is a long-term, for the Philippines, a long-term struggle of resistance. And the way that you defeat an occupying force is over the long run through resistance. And eventually what you are waiting for is some future version of the government in Beijing that says to itself, why are we doing this? This is not in our national interest. We are bleeding resources over a reef in the middle of the South China Sea, and meanwhile we have all of these other problems. Why are we continuing to cause ourselves problems over here? Right, and so what you're doing is you're trying to outlast them. And it's very frustrating as a resistance because it's not going to happen quickly, right? It's not going to happen tomorrow. China is right now feeling confident. It's feeling aggressive. It thinks that it can win. And so what you're waiting for is for that tide to turn, and it takes a while. But I mean, think about in the past. So let's look about Mahatma Gandhi in India back in the 1930s and 40s. He had to go through a long period of resistance to British rule before finally the British said to themselves, why are we doing this? Why are we trying to rule this million people over here in India when we've got our own problems at home? And by the way, this doesn't even meet with our own values. So I think that's what the Philippines is doing. You're in the middle of this long resistance. And so it's going to take reminding people constantly that this is why we resist.
Well, for me, Ray, we don't really have to look at India of their historical fight of their independence. I think I wouldn't really agree for those critics who say that Filipinos are experiencing information fatigue, or they are desensitized of what is happening in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippine independence has gone through a lot of fight for us to be independent under the Spanish rule, the Japanese, and even the Americans. Every time that there are Filipinos who are maltreated or violated or abused, for example, of course, no Filipinos during the Spanish occupation would tell their neighbors like, you just have to get used to it because we're a colony forever, right?
Right.
Nobody among our national heroes stopped thinking that we can still fight for aggression.
Yeah.
So each time we expose the Chinese aggression in the West Philippine Sea, I don't think the Filipinos are desensitized. I would argue that each time we tell that to the Filipino people and to the international community, nobody's experiencing fatigue, but they are actually awakening the sense of patriotism and also telling the international community to do more to make China accountable, to ensure that the 2016 Arbitral Award will be enforced.
Yeah.
So for those naysayers saying that they are experiencing fatigue, I don't think that they are considering themselves as Filipinos anyway.
Sure. Well, of course, the Philippines is also standing up against a barrage of a very large-scale, highly resourced, sophisticated information campaign coming from your northern neighbor, right? Which is trying to tell you, just stop, give up. There are more carrots and fewer sticks if you just go down the road that we've laid for you. All you have to do is submit to our benevolent rule, and we would be happy to treat you like...
And there'll be paradise.
Exactly. A Chinese-administered paradise, but paradise. So,
And again, as a victim of disinformation and fake news, according to this pro-China trolls, even the Chinese embassy is also making an allegation about you being sanctioned of the U.S. government and all, that you are leading a $500 million project, right, to say bad things against China.
my wife is still waiting for that money. She's very frustrated that we haven't seen a cent of it yet. By the way, I have to ask you. I'm a podcast host. I've interviewed you twice for the podcast. Why should we care about the Indo-Pacific? Like and subscribe. But I have to. This campaign by the deputy spokesperson from the Chinese
His
embassy.
name is Go Away, right? Or
Look,
did I pronounce it wrong?
I don't know. But look, this is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in diplomacy. Look, I've worked for 2 embassies. It would never occur to me to let some middle management person...
Perhaps we need to highlight that U.S. embassy, because, some trolls would say, like, yeah, of course, you're an imperialist embassy.
Well, look, it would never occur to me to let some middle management person go on a campaign against a rear admiral from the host country and engage in adolescent kind of, it's just crazy. And I'm trying to figure out what they think they're getting from this, because all it's doing, if I was the ambassador, I'd be like, I'm trying to get my message out. Why? This is like the 5th J. Tarriela post this week. What are you doing?
In a day.
Sometimes in a day,
yeah.
yes. So, no, it's just a bizarre thing. I cannot think of a single thing like it.
Well, first of all, I don't think that Mr. Go Away is doing that out of his own volition. I don't think that he would, I really enjoy the Facebook here in Manila. I'm going to post something stupid against J. Tarriela. I don't think that this is something he did it voluntarily because he enjoyed posting in Facebook, right? This has to be approved to the level of the head of the diplomatic mission.
Or at least, again, I don't know how their embassy works. I don't know how but at least he has the freedom to do that, right?
Good for him. He's enjoying Facebook here.
And the only thing I can think of is that somehow he thinks this is going to gain him favor with people back in Beijing, and he can say, "I posted against the hated J. Tarriela, 1,000 times
Honestly,
in a year."
Ray, I'm beginning to think that the reason why he enjoys attacking and posting against me in social media is because of the haha emoticons. Probably he interpreted that he is probably doing a great thing.
Yeah, he thinks he thinks they're laughing with him and not at him.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I will say I am very disappointed that I can't keep up with you, Jay, because I think I've only probably been attacked 20 to 25% as many times as you have. So it's very frustrating.
I'm not really sure whether that is something I need to be very proud of, because Mr. Go Away keeps on posting and misspelling my name.
Yeah.
But going back to my questions.
Okay, what were we talking about? I forgot.
My question is, again, about transparency. We attended a lot of Track 1.5 dialogue in different parts of the world, in Vietnam, in U.S., in Singapore, in different places. You're all over the place, right? So my question is, people are always saying, the Philippines is the only one exposing Chinese aggression, while their neighbors choose to do quiet diplomacy.
Right.
And that's why in the international media, they would think that it is only the Philippines who's being targeted against bullying and aggression. But thanks to you, you're the one telling the world that it's not true. Actually, the China Coast Guard is also encroaching the waters of Lukunya Shoal in Malaysia, in Vietnam, Natuna Island, and in Brunei. And there are also a number of Chinese maritime militia in all these places. But all of these countries do not want you to hear and know about. So what do you think is the main reason why Southeast Asian countries would choose to have quiet diplomacy while the Philippines is still taking the lead of transparency?
Well, I think there's a few things going on. One is that China looks out and it sees its strategic interests and it is very, very, very interested in places like the Bashi Channel, and it's near abroad, and so it's just naturally going to be more interested in the northern part of the South China Sea, say, than in the southern part of the South China Sea. It still claims those things down near Malaysia and Indonesia and Brunei, but it's not as urgent to it, right? Second, of course, is that, and by the way, China's interests go north too. So what we've been watching up around, you talked about the Senkakus or the Bashi Channel or even the Yellow Sea, China is on the march in all of those places. And you're seeing a lot more sort of urgency out of some of those places. So, for example, Japan and Taiwan are starting to take on elements of the Philippines' transparency strategy because they realize we have to get our own populations interested in this problem because it is coming down right down our throats, right? So, those places are farther away. China also believes that it has to push the United States outside of what we call the first island chain. And so that's Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines especially, of course going up to the Korean Peninsula. And so it is working very, very hard to try to build capacity and to push to the east more. I mean, it's pushing to the south as well, but its emphasis right now is to the east. And it's also, of course, very focused on what it perceives to be countries that are closer to the U.S. And it's interesting, of course, because I did 3 years as an attaché in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese government, very different, right? So they're a communist government. They control information a great deal. They practice what they call bamboo diplomacy, which is not to have any allies, essentially. And they would often try to encourage us, the United States, to stand up to China in Southeast Asia, but to do it very quietly because you don't want to make them mad. So it was sort of this almost, they'd also try to play both sides of it almost. But they've got their own problems. Everything from China's largest construction project, island building project yet seems to be happening right now at Antelope Reef in the Paracel Islands, along with a huge paramilitary, Coast Guard, militia, the rest of those guys, build up there. We've been tracking a huge Chinese fishing fleet off of central Vietnam over the last, and growing out over the last 4 years. And one of my most amazing stories that I ever reported was in 2023, China actually sailed a survey vessel surrounded by Coast Guard and maritime militia off the coast of southern Vietnam and spent an entire month going in this strange pattern, which turns out when we actually looked into it, and actually when the New York Times, reporting off of data we gave them, reported it out, was the symbol for basically the meaning China in China, Chinese character. They basically spent a month driving around making the symbol for China
to draw
off the
that
coast
trail.
Off the coast of Vietnam, just to tell Vietnam, we own this.
But I mean, if Southeast Asian countries would choose to have quiet diplomacy, do you think that is best for the region's interests, not allowing the world to know what is really happening?
So it was interesting. Last year I was at a conference in Kuala Lumpur, and one of the people on stage was a Chinese diplomat at one point, and I raised my hand and I asked this gentleman, I said, can you tell me there are 5 Malaysian occupied features in Lukonia Shoals. Does China claim indisputable sovereignty over those 5 features? And his first answer was he didn't answer the question. And so I raised my hand again. I'm sorry, you didn't answer the question. I asked it again. And his second answer was he didn't answer the question. And then I asked it a third time, and then the moderator shut me down, right? And the obvious truth of the matter, and I managed to make this point later when I was on stage, is they can't answer the question because, of course, they do. It's just that their attention hasn't turned that far south yet. And my point was to my Malaysian colleagues is if you sit and say, well, it's the Philippines now and we won't worry about it because nothing's happening to us today, who's going to stand up for you tomorrow?
And the other question is it really true that nothing's happening in their waters?
Well, right. So the reason you know that it's coming eventually is that 365 days a year, there's at least one China Coast Guard ship, maybe two,
Sometimes three.
in their waters, right? In their EEZ. It patrols, it goes all around their oil and gas fields. The fishermen see them all the time. They're the same ones that we see further north around Mischief Reef, but they're just quieter there. Not, people don't pay as much attention to them because the Malaysians watch them. They'll send their Navy and Coast Guard ships to follow them around, but right now, China isn't pushing as hard as it is further north because it just hasn't got there yet.
Well, you mentioned a while ago Taiwan. You also mentioned Bashi Channel.
Mm-hmm.
A few days ago, you're the ones who made headlines about the so-called Chinese scholars wanting to argue that Batanes is part of Taiwan and that they need to increase their sovereignty patrols for them to assert their position.
That is such a fascinating story because so this all started at the end of May. And at the end of May, in what would normally be just like a footnote in the news, Japan and the Philippines announced we're going to have delimitation talks between our exclusive economic zones, right? That's something that normal countries do, right? Okay, let's figure out exactly where the Philippines and Japan are in this area that up until now nobody has really talked about anybody else, right? And China immediately objected and said that we have sovereign interests there. Okay. And then what they did next was really interesting because they sent their Coast Guard plus some Maritime Safety Administration ships, and they went all the way east of the Bashi Channel, all the way, so far east that they were way outside of their own 10-dash line, right? And they started driving around. And meanwhile, they had all kinds of people back in Beijing and other places saying, oh, those are to assert China's sovereignty. And we looked at that and said, wait a minute, China's never claimed this. This is new, right? And we're looking at our map.
It's outside the 10-dash line.
It's outside the 10-dash line. It's outside of anything that could reasonably be considered under international law to belong to China. And so nothing they've ever claimed before. And so we said, how do they justify this? So this is really funny. I woke up on Thursday morning and I was speaking that morning at the WPS conference. And so I just said, look, I just want to get an update. So I went into my AI, right? And I said, just tell me if there is any update in English or Mandarin on how China justifies these patrols. And it turns out that they had just put out this academic paper that said, oh, actually, China owns Batanes. And it's unanimous amongst all these scholars from 7 different universities that we assembled. And I said, wait, no. And I kept looking at, are you sure? This is real. And so I went back over it. And so instantly, I put together the social media posts and put them out over our networks. And by 9 o'clock in the morning, this was everywhere. And of course, we had Secretary Teodoro come at lunch. And by the time he arrived at lunch, he already had the media in his face asking about this. And everybody was trying to figure out, where did this come from? And I kind of knew the answer to that, because they needed some kind of justification for why they were out so far east, because it made no sense otherwise. And by the way, the universities themselves told you as much, because in their report they said, we had to do this because of the Philippine-Japan delimitation talks. And so, so people would then say, well, it's just some university professors. So, to which I say three things. One is there is no such thing in a communist system. Everybody does what is they believe, at least, is in the state's interest. 2 is, look, they told you what they're doing and why they're doing it. And 3 is you look out on the water and look at where the ships are, right? So the Chinese government sent those ships, not the universities. The Chinese government sent the ships. So if you put all those things together, it's pretty clear what is actually going on here. You cannot, and 4, every gray zone aggression starts small.
Yes.
Think back to our fishermen shelters at Mischief Reef, right? Oh, the fishermen, they just need a place to go when it gets windy. Who could possibly, and then, years later, Xi Jinping is standing in the Rose Garden with Barack Obama and saying, we had no intention of militarizing the features. Within a year, right, we started to see the planes land, we started to see the anti-ship missiles, right? This is the way the gray zone works. So if you say to me, you're overreacting, you're hyping the issue, what I will say to you is what China's gray zone strategy depends on is underreacting. Mm-hmm. They want to keep you quiet, keep you calm, don't worry about this one, don't worry about the next one, don't worry about the next one, and then one day you wake up and there's an airfield on that reef, right? Because you just didn't worry about the one in front of it.
And let me also add, after the patrols, the illegal patrols of the Chinese Maritime Forces near the northwestern part of the Philippines to challenge the delimitation between the Philippines and Japan, what happened last month was the Chinese ambassador also visited Batanes, right? That's why I asked on my social media account, what was really the intent of our honorable ambassador in meeting the governor of Batanes?
Yeah.
Is it goodwill or it is part of a reconnaissance as part of their narrative?
You know what? I'm not sure I'm ready to quite go there yet. I will say I don't think
So it's goodwill?
it might have been. Or look, I don't think necessarily that all of even though it's a top-down system, even though it's an autocracy, I don't think that necessarily all of the elements of the government work in perfect harmony and concert. And so what you have seen actually since the university report went out is that some of that has been taken down. Because I don't think they expected it to get the attention it got. Mm-hmm. I think they were hoping it would go out quietly and just stay there below the surface, and then later they could put another layer on top of that and another layer on top of that, right? This was just sort of an initial thing to make an initial claim so that later on when somebody says, hey, you have no right to be there, they say, well, we've had these scholarly reports for years, and it's a very complicated issue. It's very disputed, and this is just a territorial dispute. All of the things we've heard for years.
And you can also recall what happened last year, right? When the Chinese government were also claiming the entire Palawan is also part of the Chinese dynasty, what's that?
So I'm not as worried about the Palawan thing because I think most of that is on social media, and they don't really need the Palawan claim to claim any new water. Mm-hmm. I mean, unless you're talking about the water all the way up to and on the other side of Palawan, but they haven't tried to do that. The thing that got my attention with this one is actually the ships. So they needed Batanes, or at least confusion over Batanes, in order to have their ships out there and have some kind of reason why, right? In order to challenge the Philippine-Japan. So the Philippine-Japan delimitation talks were just their pretext. It was just their excuse to start pushing out past the first island chain, past the Bashi Channel, to be where they wanted to be anyway. Mm-hmm. And now they can sort of say, and besides, Batanes, it's kind of disputed, and so maybe that, and so all they're trying to do is muddy the waters so that they can keep pushing to the east.
Yes, but again, I would also like to support what you said, that the moment they float an information, they are also actually using trial balloon, right? So in this case, they're using the scholars, and then after that, if nobody would react, they're going to leak it to the media, and then amplify it, nobody would react, and then it becomes a policy statement.
Right.
So the reason why I mentioned in what happened in Palawan last year is because also of the public backlash here in the Philippines. Yeah. And the same thing with what is happening now in Batanes. That's why I always argued that the moment those trial balloons are started floating,
Right.
Chinese government started floating the idea of this misinformation, you have to immediately respond back.
And I think that the Philippines did. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that all up and down, you've seen it throughout the government, there has been a substantial pushback, which is, I think, why you saw the universities take their report down. But look, this goes back to the kind of the public relations arm of the Chinese embassy, and I put out a little bit of a humorous tweet about this, because all they had to do, like, if, again, in a normal embassy, what you would do is to say, it is not the policy of the Chinese government to claim Batanes. That would be that simple. It would have ended the entire conversation in an hour, right? Because it was like, okay, it's just some university professors, but we have this very clear statement from the Chinese government, end of story.
Or the Chinese embassy.
Or the
right?
Chinese embassy, which is part of the Chinese government.
Yeah, and
It's all you need. And that would be like, if some group of Stanford professors, assembled a group and said, we think that the United States still owns, name your, well, the Philippines. We think that the U.S. still owns the Philippines. The U.S. government would be out like that saying, we don't know those people. Those guys, they can say whatever they want. They're a private university, whatever, right? But the Chinese government can't say that. Why? Well, they kind of need the Batanes claim to justify what's on the water to the east, which is their patrols.
Last 2 months ago,
Yep.
before Batanes became a headliner, of course, the issue then was BAJO de MASINLOC.
Yes.
Scarborough Shoal. And even before the NTFWPS came out with a press conference, you were already showing the international community and the public the satellite photos of what's happening inside BAJO de MASINLOC or Scarborough Shoal. Would you argue that this kind of your transparency contribution to the public discourse without first the Philippine government telling the public what's happening is also helpful in countering Chinese gray zone?
So this comes back to the question of, is the existence of independent open source intelligence reporting on the maritime space, is it helpful, is it hurtful, or is it just inevitable, right? The fact is there is more access, there's the cost of satellite imagery and all of these things is coming down. It's becoming more accessible. It's becoming more democratized. The oceans are going to become more transparent.
A day after the NTFWPS press conference, the Chinese government immediately announced that the research mission is already completed and we're going to remove the platform,
Yeah.
in which they did.
Yeah.
So can we both argue that the result of the transparency telling the international community is actually one of the compelling reasons why the Chinese government decided to pull out and remove the platform once and for all?
Of course, until we're able to open the secret Chinese government books that they'll never let us open, we won't know the answer to that question, right? But there is precedent there, right? So I was in Vietnam in 2014. And if you open up your history book, you remember there was this thing about an oil rig.
HSYS, oil rig.
Yes. It went down in 1981, right? It went down into the waters off of central Vietnam and created a little bit of an international firestorm. And the Vietnamese sent out their Coast Guard, which was much smaller than the Chinese Coast Guard, and were pushed all over the place. But remarkably, for a communist government, they turned on the cameras and they put the information out on YouTube for a period of time. And it was, for a guy who was posted in Vietnam, I was looking around like, this is amazing. I haven't seen this amount of sort of information freedom, but it was clear that Vietnam, for that period of time, believed that transparency was in their interests. And when that oil rig actually went home early, right? Now, I will say it produced a really remarkable set of events in Vietnam. And I will say also that the Vietnamese government wasn't entirely comfortable with what it had unleashed, because in a communist government, you're not really comfortable when people are out in the streets chanting slogans because you never know when the slogans are going to turn on you. So you don't really like that much. And so in the end, they kind of had to shut it all down. And I remember actually showing up across the street from the Chinese embassy on the day that they shut it down. And the Vietnam had just put out so many security personnel, breaking everybody up, trying to make sure that they didn't have any more protests. But China did send the oil rig home early. So there is precedent for China being convinced, because of that international exposure, because of the reputational cost, that it's not in their interest to do what they're doing. And so, it's not, now I will say, China in 2014 is not the same as China in 2026. Again, they are much more confident, they're much more aggressive, they've got a much bigger force. But it's not like they have an insurmountable resistance to reputational cost.
Well, my question is, there are a lot of illegally reclaimed bases already in the entire South China Sea. Spratly, in Paracel, and this has been widely used already by the People's Republic of China in supporting their deployment of maritime forces, whether China Coast Guard or PLA Navy warship. Do you still believe that Scarborough Shoal is still a strategic piece for the Chinese deployment as forward base in controlling the entire South China Sea?
Look, I think it has to be watched extremely closely. And I think the Philippines was right to be concerned about that platform. First of all, the platform, even though it was a floating platform, did not move for several days at the beginning. And so there was concern that it was not just going to float around, that it was actually going to be fixed. And once there is as we know from history, once there is a single fixed thing attached to a reef, that serves as the basis of everything else that comes afterwards, right? So BAJO de MASINLOC is only 120 nautical miles from Zambales, right? It is what we would call in military terms key terrain. And the Philippines would consider a excuse me, I'm going back to the 1940s. I'm repeating Chinese talking points. A Chinese occupation of Scarborough Shoal, a reclamation of Scarborough Shoal, a military buildup on Scarborough Shoal, that would be an extremely serious threat to the Philippines. And one of the reasons I think we have to watch it very closely is when China declared its nature reserve, then it sent out the picture of where the nature reserve was, and it was only on 1/3 of Scarborough Shoal. Bringing up the question is, what's going to happen to the other 2/3, right? And so that remains a concern of mine is, I think, and we keep seeing these reports. I just saw one in the South China Morning Post of Chinese authorities and scholars saying, yeah, we haven't given up on the idea of having, inhabiting Scarborough Shoal.
I have a question, an honest question to you, Ray.
Okay.
You are an American.
Still, yep.
And when you talk about South China Sea, this is not just about great power competition. I've always highlighted that the reason why we need to do this is not that because the Philippines is dictated by the United States or we are a pawn by the United States in this great power competition, but because we have our own agency and we believe that China is violating our sovereignty and sovereign rights. Now, this year we are celebrating our 10th year anniversary of the 2016 Arbitral Award, and you probably saw my post greeting the Chinese embassy, happy anniversary to us. Without you, there will be no Arbitral Award, right? So my question is, for the Americans, how do you really see the importance of the 2016 Arbitral Award?
Well, when you say the Americans, right, we have to distinguish between who you're talking about. For your average American living in Iowa, right, they don't wake up in the morning thinking about the 2016 Arbitral Award, right? They've got other things going on in their lives. So, but for those of us who are in this world of geopolitical security, that are concerned about the expansionism of China and all of those kinds of things. And, by the way, we talk about this thing called the rules-based order. The rules-based order is one of those terms that we throw around in our community that makes a lot of sense to us, right? So we look at it and we say, if the alternative, the reason there was a United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was because the alternative was that everybody would go and grab as much ocean as you possibly could, and then ultimately we're going to come into conflict where those two things come up against one another. If there were no rules, the only rule would be who can back it up with the most force, right? That would be, and so we saw this coming to some degree because different countries were claiming different amounts of water. And so ultimately we came up with this system that said, okay, 12 nautical miles is a territorial sea, 200 nautical miles is an exclusive economic zone. We came up with the system, and amazingly, it actually has worked really well. I mean, throughout, really since, 1982 was when it was sort of finalized and different countries came on board. China signed it in 1996. The United States, bizarrely, did not ratify it because did not ratify it though, could not get it through the United States Senate to this day, and yet has become one of its foremost advocates and enforcers, right? So a freedom of navigation operation is actually to sort of put out there that we want everybody to stay within the confines of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In fact, I'll tell you a story. I was having this discussion with my Chinese counterpart in Australia after a U.S. Ship called the USS Decatur was doing a freedom of navigation op in the South China Sea and almost was hit, collided with a Chinese vessel that was trying to keep us away. And so my counterpart was asking me, he said, I don't understand. The South China Sea is very big. Why did you have to come so close to this place? And I said, that's the whole program. The program is not to sail around because then we admit that your claims are valid. Our program is to go close because that's to say, no, this is legal under UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this convention has become the basis for peace and prosperity throughout the world in so many ways because everybody recognizes these common rules. But China wants to have this big cutout because China's version of this is, well, yeah, that's good for everybody else. But for us, we've got these historic claims, right? And so we need you not to sort of look at it over here. So the problem is, and those of us who are serious about this issue, and honestly, that includes most serious government officials in most serious capitals, look at it and say, if we allow this thing to start coming apart, because people say, well, China can do it, why can't we do it? If it's good for China, why is it not good for Australia? Why is it not good why can't the United States claim everything from California to Guam as being our big EEZ, right? Why not us? Well, because we still kind of believe that things hold together more peacefully internationally if we don't exceed the limits of what we put down in this convention. But what China is doing is threatening to sort of start the unraveling because there's only a certain point at which other countries say, look, we just have to go get what we can get before somebody else takes it.
Well, Ray, you have testified also at the Senate, and you've been talking to a lot of policymakers in Washington with regard to the U.S. commitment in supporting the Philippine government. I would like to know, what is the level of support of Washington when it comes to the Mutual Defense Treaty and, of course, standing firm against Chinese aggression? I
think astonishingly strong. Maybe stronger than I've seen it since there were bases here, right? And I do credit to a large degree the Philippines Transparency Program for bringing that home. And here's why I say that. People know that the current administration and some of the mood in America is more isolationist than it's been, right? There's this impulse to say, why do we have to do this for our allies in Europe and over here? And, why can't other people take more of the burden and that kind of thing? But I see still, and again, when I was on Capitol Hill in October, I still saw an amazing amount of bipartisan support for the Philippines very specifically. And maybe more than even for any other ally, considering, just sort of where everything is, right? Now, of course, relationships are different. We've got a nuclear submarine pact with Australia and Britain. Those are different things. But in terms of the direction of the alliance, I have seen a hardening of support and increase in support for the Philippines. And by the way, a bunch of those senators that I met while I was there in October had been to the Philippines. They had come here and had seen for themselves. But more than that, I think they had seen the pictures. Mm-hmm. They had seen the video. They had understood what kind of strain the Philippines was under.
You mentioned a lot of times that gray zone actor like the People's Republic of China hated light. They don't want to have spotlight against their aggression and unlawful activities in the West Philippine Sea. But at the same time, you were also mentioning about cognitive warfare, the FIMI operation of the People's Republic of China here in the Philippines. So trying to weigh in what is the most delicate area of our phase of countering gray zone. Is it at sea or is it at the information space?
It's almost like asking you, which hand is more important, your left or your right, right? Because the two are working together. China needs the gray zone operation in the water to back up their political warfare campaign on land. And they need their political warfare campaign on land to change the minds of the people in the country that they're targeting. Because ultimately, the goal that they have through their gray zone warfare is to get you to accept their narrative. They want every Filipino, or at least enough Filipinos in important positions to say, there's no sense in fighting back. There's no sense in resisting. Of course, the narratives that they will use are much more diabolical than that. They'll say, if you want to resist, it's just because you want war. And, you're leading us into war. And, in the South China Sea should be a sea of peace. And by resisting, you are making it a sea of war. See, the thing is, in the Chinese narrative, the responsibility is always on the other party, right? If it's escalation, it's not because we shot you with a water cannon, it's because you took a picture of it. And the responsibility for de-escalation is on you too. You want to de-escalate, well, what are you willing to give me? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's China's way. That's the way that the gray zone warfare works, is somehow get you to accept all the responsibility for the situation, give China something in return, and they reset the board in their favor, piece by piece, line by line, row by row, and before you know it, there they are right in your lap. Because every time they do this, they've got this combination of gray zone warfare on the water and political warfare on land.
For over 3 years of looking at what is happening in the West Philippine Sea and the entire South China Sea, what do you think is the most effective way that we can really make China recalculate the costs of those unlawful activities that they're doing?
Yeah. I think it's got to come home to China that its strategy is destined to fail. And that's, again, that comes back to it being a long-term project, because China looks out now and says, yes, but we're winning. Right? Because now, look, we have BAJO MASINLOC is now Huangyandao, right? See, and we've got our ships there, so they can look out and they can see these things. But what they are also seeing, if they look hard enough, is they see Japan becoming stronger and the Philippines becoming stronger and working with Japan, and Taiwan beginning to strengthen its resistance, and the United States remaining involved, and then all of these European countries and others coming in to say, we have an interest here too. And so what you're looking for is that time, that set of circumstances that forces China to recalculate what's in its own national interest. And so that's where this long-term horizon comes in. People used to ask me all the time, in fact, they still do sometimes, how do we get the Chinese out of the West Philippine Sea? Well, it's not like you can just sort of go out and say, oh, shoo, get out, right? What are you going to do? They've got a 12,000-ton Coast Guard ship running around. So it's not the thing that happens soon. It's the thing that happens when the Philippines continues to commit, and you've seen this happening, commit to this long-term resistance.
Ray, it's been almost an hour already of listening to your wisdom and strategic intelligence of things in the West Philippine Sea. We're now moving on the second part of my podcast, wherein I'm going to read some of the mean tweets of your fans about what you do, being so nosy about what's happening in the entire South China Sea.
You mean
So-
there are people who don't love me?
I don't think that these are people. These are trolls.
Oh,
So are you good with that? I mean, I'll read the comment and then I'll ask you to react.
bring it on.
Okay. According to a Facebook post about an interview where you commented about regarding the Chinese online influence in the Philippines, an FB user said Ray Powell is a Western propagandist and he's not actually helping us to solve the issue against China, but he's actually escalating the tension against China instead.
Yeah, I guess I would just point out that, it goes back to this question of who's responsible for escalation. Is the responsibility for escalation on the party who is actually using force to compel its neighbor to do certain things, the one who is actually swarming and water cannoning and ramming and lasering, and all, is the responsibility on that party, or is it the responsibility on the party that points it out?
Yeah.
Right. So
And let me also correct what he said, that you're a propagandist.
I am Western, I think.
You're Western, but
I was
you're
born.
not,
I was born
yeah,
in Santa Barbara. I'm even Western in American context.
but not a propagandist.
So I think to be a propagandist, look, I've worked for government,
Yeah.
and we have people whose job it is to tell the government story, right? You have an official spokesman for the political party or for the government or for the, so, I mean, you could sort of read that as propaganda. I call it like I see it. If you don't like what I say, that's okay. It's a free information space. But I will tell you, what comes from me comes from me. There's nobody who tells me what to do or write, and I don't report back to anybody except for my board of directors.
And from TikTok, this is about your interview where you discussed the Chinese creation of natural reserve in Scarborough Shoal and cementing their claims on it. He said China had already opted out from UNCLOS. I don't think that's true.
It's not actually true, no.
Was never a participant of the so-called arbitration 2016 since the beginning of the so-called arbitration. What's your take?
First of all, I love the word so-called. I have come to learn that so-called is
I'm
one
using
of those
that
things-
already.
Well, yeah, but you have to be careful because that is like
So-called China scholars.
the word so-called. I actually went into the China Media Project, and there's an entire page dedicated to how China loves the word so-called. I mean, you're like the so-called spokesman for the so-called, West
Transparency.
exactly, so-called Transparency Initiative in the so-called Arbitral Award. I mean, they love so-called. What was the question? No, I don't even remember the question.
Yeah, the Chinese already opt out in UNCLOS.
Yeah.
They didn't participate in the arbitration, so it doesn't apply to them, basically. That's the claim.
So, look, China. First of all, they are still officially in UNCLOS. What they've done is try to cut themselves apart out of UNCLOS that they don't have to do. And what they're really doing is they're sort of like setting up their own legal authority independent of UNCLOS. Now, every country is going to lean ultimately on its own legal system, right? Get it. Totally get it. Nobody's going to be part of a system they believe goes directly against their national interest. What China is doing is trying to have its cake and eat it too. It's trying to basically have both sides. It wants to be a part of UNCLOS. It just doesn't want UNCLOS to restrain China, right? So China looks at everything through a political lens. So when the Philippines basically went to the police, or and said,
Or the media.
and talking about in terms of the
Arbitration.
arbitration, right? They went to the court, and this was the court that UNCLOS told them to go to, right? So when China says this is not an UNCLOS court, well, there's not such a thing as an UNCLOS court, but there's the court that UNCLOS basically said go to arbitration. So the Philippines did this. And China, realizing that it had basically an anti-UNCLOS line or narrative said, well, we're not going to win if we go to court because, first of all, we haven't had a chance to stack the court with our own judges. So we're not going to win, so we will just say it doesn't apply to us and it's all illegal. So by calling the actual court illegal instead of their own actions illegal, that's what gives them this narrative, which to most of us looks a little ridiculous, but in their own context, it makes total sense.
Well, for X, this is a very long post where someone criticizes you about your intentions in the West Philippine Sea issue. The post said you are misrepresenting your identity and affiliation. He said Powell has been dishonestly and deliberately concealing his background. He bylined his article as Ray Powell, the name he has been using for 2 years now in spreading disinformation in the country about the dispute between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea. He never used his official name and title, retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Powell. That identification would have alerted readers what the real motive of this act is, and even ignored it altogether. Who the heck is Raymond M. Powell? That was a very long post. He's probably your #1 fan. What can you say about this?
First of all, I'm a little concerned that I've been demoted. So I
you're
didn't
full colonel, right?
You know, I wonder if there's something I should check my retirement pay and make sure I'm still being paid as a retired colonel. Look, breaking news. I was in the military. I know this is hard to find out. You only can find this out if you dig deep, deep into the National Archives, in the most secure parts of the archives, to find out that I've been in the military. I mean, I'm not sure how many different ways I can tell people. I mean, you announced it when you started this podcast. Mm-hmm. So I have seen this line around. I'm baffled by it. Maybe what they'd be happy with is if I dressed up in my old uniform and walked around in it. I do that sometimes at veterans events. No, it's look. But actually, I saw this from the very beginning from some of
your fan, Ado Paglinawan.
Yes,
Herman
yes,
Chulaurel.
yes.
Yeah.
I remember I saw this.
Asia Century something.
By the way, can I just say about that?
Yeah.
What is it about media organizations who quote, who look at these Asian Century Philippines people and call them a nonprofit think tank? First of all, to be a nonprofit, you have to be a nonprofit. If you pull the SEC records, they are a for-profit corporation. Their website calls them a nonprofit. They are not a nonprofit. Second of all, I don't even call SeaLight a think tank. What thinking do they do, right? What is their peer-reviewed publication that they put out? So, look, they can call themselves whatever they want. The Philippines is a free country. They can spew whatever they'd like to spew. Fine. But you don't have to call them what they call themselves, because what they call themselves isn't right. It's not true.
Okay. And lastly, in YouTube, somebody posted where they are being skeptical about your intentions in the West Philippine Sea concern. He said, Americans are there to protect PBBM from coup d'etat of the DDS organization. They were saying you Americans are there to protect the president from a military coup of the DDS organization.
So I have no comment on what the Americans are here to do, since I am a private citizen, so I don't speak for the U.S. government. I will say I was actually here in the Philippines during a time when the Americans protected a president from a coup. That was in 1989, I believe. There was the coups against, several coups against
President Corazon
Aquino.
Aquino, yes.
Yeah, and there was one in which F-4 aircraft from Clark Air Base flew low over Manila to sort of keep the plotters, the military coup inside, so that the government could get organized. So it's not like it's never happened. But there is, I think, there's a big downside for governments who try to over-involve themselves in the domestic politics. You will notice I never talk about the domestic politics of the Philippines. it's not my place as an American to get involved in who your president is. And in fact, there have been times when U.S. politicians have done things like express an opinion about who should be the president of this or that place. I do not approve, right? I do not think that is ever in the U.S. interest. By the way, I think probably the last time I saw that happen, to my dismay, was our own vice president go to Hungary and sort of express support for their president right before he lost the election. That doesn't put you in great odor with the next government. So it's a bad precedent. It's something that almost always the U.S. government is wise to stay out of and tries to stay out of, in my experience.
Thank you very much, Ray. But before I let you go, I have one last final question.
This isn't the question about who the first son of Lapu-Lapu was,
No.
right? No, okay, just checking, because I don't know.
Do you believe that the West Philippine Sea is for the Filipino people and the next generation?
I believe the West Philippine Sea should be for the Filipino people throughout all generations. It is the Philippines' heritage. It is the Philippines' lifeline. It is the Philippines' right under international law and under all common decency.
Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Colonel Raymond Powell, thank you for your time. Many of us are grateful for your conviction and dedication in defending the Philippines' sovereignty and sovereign rights. This fight is far from over, but our country is not alone. The international community stands with us, and most importantly, we stand on the rule of law. The 2016 Arbitral Award and the UNCLOS. Again, thank you very much. Sa mga listeners at viewers ng ating podcast, another episode, another story ang ating natunghayan. Magkita-kita ulit tayo sa susunod nating episode. Muli, ako si Tristan Tarriela at tandaan, no spin, no lies, just the truth.